All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the Emerald Ash Borer informational meeting. I am Jonathan Ostis with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and I will be giving a broad overview of kind of Emerald Ash Borer biology, management regulations, distribution in the state, and how to report. This meeting will be recorded, so I will have a link posted to MDA's main EAB program page. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel. So look for that in the next couple days if you know anybody that would benefit from watching this presentation to learn more about Emerald Ash Borer. So it will be recorded and made available there. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, kind of running through a broad amount of stuff. And my colleague Chris Mallett will be in the chat posting links to different resources that I mentioned throughout the presentation. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A at any time. I will probably get to them at the end, but depending on what it is, I might clarify certain things as we go along. With that, I am going to get started, and we will kind of get going. And like I said, please enter any questions in the Q&A as we go along. And we will have time to answer any questions or any comments you may have at the end of the meeting. So once again, the agenda is I'm going to start with the life cycle of the insect, talk about the host trees, how to recognize emerald ash borer, so how to confirm it, the signs and symptoms you might look for to try to catch it earlier on, what the known distribution is in the state, and then I will touch on the regulations associated with emerald ash borer. So this would be the kind of firewood regulations and the movement of ash trees. And then we'll talk about management, which will mostly be just about how to manage individual yard trees or in a community. If you have more questions on forest or woodland management, I will have some resources to point you to talk to with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And lastly, we'll talk about how best to report new infestations. Now, once you know how to identify this insect, how to report those. So I will go ahead and get started. All right, just a little bit of background. Emerald ash borer is a metallic wood boring beetle. Its native range is parts of China, North and South Korea, parts of the Russian Far East, Japan, and Taiwan. It is, it acts like a secondary pest in its native range where it's not that big of a deal. It co-evolved with their ash species in that range, and so it doesn't have the same impact like it does on our North American ash trees. It is thought that it likely arrived in North America sometime in the early 90s into the port of Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario. So it likely was brought over via solid wood packaging material. And it went for a number of years without being detected, given the cryptic nature of this insect. So it wasn't until 2002 that it was first identified in Detroit, Michigan. And at that point, there were thousands of dead and dying ash trees throughout the greater Detroit area, and lots of firewood and ash nursery stock had been moved out of that area to new locations in the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic states, kind of kicking off that rapid spread of EAB throughout North America. So you fast forward to now, there's about 38 states and 5 Canadian provinces that have known emerald ash borer infestations. The most recent jumps have been finds of emerald ash borer out in just outside Portland, Oregon, and up in Vancouver, British Columbia. And so emerald ash borer was first identified in St. Paul, Minnesota in 2009. And now in 2025, we have 54 counties with known infestations, with Aitkin County being the newest county to have emerald ash borer be found. All right, so we'll dive into the life cycle here. So it's important to know how to deal with emerald ash borer. You have to kind of understand a little bit about the life cycle of the insect. So we have what we call the active period and the non-active period. So the active period is really just the flight season of the insect. It's when the adults beetles are out there flying, moving around, and so that is considered May through September. And so that's a bit of a range, just given that Minnesota is a large state, and that initial emergence time for the insect is going to vary from south to north. So In general, in the southern half of the state, we start to see initial insect emergence in kind of mid to late May. It kind of depends on how quickly things heat up in the spring. We use growing degree days to track when that initial emergence will be exactly. And so if you're interested in that, it's 450 growing degree days at a base temperature of 50 is when we reach initial emergence of the insect. So in the northern half of the states, the further north you go, that initial emergence tends to be more into the middle of June to late June, depending on how quickly things heat up. So once we start having beetle emergence, they emerge from the trees. They begin doing a little bit of maturation feeding in the canopy. They, nibbling on leaves for a few days. This is nothing that you notice with the naked eye. It's not like, say, if you're looking at Japanese beetle, how they skeletonize leaf. So it's nothing that you'd really notice. So after that maturation feeding is done, they go and find a mate. They mate, and then the female beetles begin laying eggs in the bark cracks and crevices. And so female beetle on average lays between 60 and 90 eggs in their lifetime. And these adult beetles aren't super long lived. They on average are living for a little over 30 days, but can live up to 50 days. And so once they begin laying those eggs, they lay them in the bark cracks and crevices. And when they're initially infesting a tree, they're starting in that mid to upper canopy of the ash tree, where that bark transitions from smooth to rough, typically in branches between 2 to 6 inches in diameter. And they usually lay them on the south or southwest facing side of the tree first. So the side of the tree that gets the most amount of direct sunlight. Once those eggs are laid, within a week or two, they hatch, and then the larva begins burrowing through the bark and into that cambium layer where it does the damage to the tree. So it's really the larval stage of this insect that does the damage to the tree. And they tunnel in that cambium layer, kind of disrupting that flow of nutrients between the crown and the root system. And once enough of these insects have built up in the tree, that's how it kills the tree. So the larva goes through what we call larval instar stages. These are basically just growing sizes. So they go through these 4 growing sizes before they then chew a pupal chamber in about a 1/4 inch into the sapwood, or on really large mature ash trees, they'll do that into the bark as well. And so you can see that in that center picture there. That's a larva that's finished tunneling. It's done the damage that it's going to do to the tree. It's now folded over in its pupal chamber, and it's waiting for things to heat up again the next spring and summer to pupate and turn into the adult beetle and start that process all over again. So what I just explained right there is the 1-year life cycle. We have both a 1-year and a 2-year life cycle in Minnesota. And that's important because that means you can have any immature larval stage underneath the bark at any time of year. And to give you an example of how that 2-year life cycle works, an emerald ash borer egg that was laid in the summer of 2024 hatched, made it partway through its larval development before going dormant for this winter we've just gone through. This next spring and summer, when it heats up, it'll continue its larval development until it makes its way to its pupal chamber. And then it'll overwinter a second time. And then in the summer of 2026, it'll pupate and emerge as an adult beetle to start that process all over again. So we have both that 1-year and 2-year life cycle. And the further north in Minnesota you go, the more we have in that 2-year life cycle. All right. So next is, I kind of mentioned this already, but how emerald ash borer kills a tree. It's really, an ash tree can withstand an attack by a few of those larvae tunneling underneath the bark there. But once, a lot of eggs have been laid on a tree and you have lots of emerald ash borer larvae tunneling underneath the bark, it essentially girdles the tree. So you can go from a very healthy looking street pictured here with a small amount of emerald ash borer where you can't really see any signs or symptoms to, 5-6 years later where you have mass tree mortality, you have all the trees dead lining the street. And so, depending on the size tree, you can have hundreds to thousands of beetles emerge from an individually infested tree. And that is really how it kills the tree. And we have this kind of death curve graphic to kind of show you how emerald ash borer populations work. They begin to grow slowly at first, but as you know, with each female beetle laying 60 to 90 eggs in their lifetime, that population starts to build, and you kind of hit this exponential growth. And then once that population explodes, within a couple years after that, you start to see that kind of mass tree mortality. And a lot of tree mortality in an area or community really happens in that second half, and it goes quick. So you have a lot of that tree mortality happening within a 6 or 7 year period when it wipes out, 98 to 99% of the mature ash trees in an area. So this is what really overwhelms property owners and communities' ability to deal with this insect. It doesn't seem like much at first, and then all of a sudden that population explodes, and you have so many trees dead and dying in the landscape. You just don't have the resources to keep up with it. And ash trees do become very hazardous very quickly. So if they're in locations that can damage property or potentially hurt people, they have to be dealt with. All right, so the host trees that emerald ash borer attacks are all true ash. So anything in the Fraxinus species, just as a reminder, ash trees have opposite branching, compound leaves, and 5 to many leaflets. They have this kind of diamond ridge furrowed bark. A lot of times in communities, they'll get these green bands that have some website information, and they'll put them on ash trees in town to help raise awareness. So people notice that and be like, yeah, I have that in my yard as well. So we have resources for ash tree ID if you need that help. But in general, we have 3 types of ash that are native to Minnesota. So we have green ash, which is found throughout the entire state. This is the most common tree in parks, yards, right-of-ways, windrows, things like that. And it's a large component of our forest as well. And then we have black ash that is found throughout 2/3 of the state. And that's where the bulk of our kind of forest resource is, especially in north central Minnesota, where we have these large black ash swamps. And then we also have pockets of white ash in more upland areas in the eastern part of the state. And it's also somewhat common being planted in yards and right-of-ways and things like that. And all 3 of these species are highly susceptible to emerald ash borer. So like I mentioned before, it is about a 98 or 99% mortality rate. So once it's in an area, your ash trees are going to be impacted. Not on here, but I will mention there is an alternative host. It's called the white fringe tree. It's in the same family. It's in the olive family. It's an ornamental shrub that's not native to Minnesota, but sometimes you will see it planted in parts of the southern half of the state in yards or in landscaped areas. Emerald ash borer can complete its life cycle in it, but it's not a preferred host. So if you're looking for a new ornamental shrub, we just suggest avoiding the white fringe tree. All right. And I just forgot to mention too that Minnesota has over 1 billion ash trees. We have a huge amount of ash as a forest resource, and it's super common in all of our communities. On average, in our communities, it's 1 out of every 5 trees is an ash tree. And especially as you get to parts of western and northern Minnesota, some communities, it's 1 out of every 2 or every 3 trees. So it is a huge component and will have a big impact in your area. Next up is how to recognize emerald ash borer. So if you think you've found it, how you would confirm it. So the number one way is recognizing that S-shaped feeding gallery. So the tunneling pattern that the larva makes in that cambium layer on the tree. And so it's very distinct. It's the only insect in ash that will make that type of tunneling pattern. So you at some point within that insect feeding gallery see that tight S-shaped curve as you see in that top picture on the left. And the closer you get to where that larva initially started, you'll see that kind of tight S-shape back and forth. It can do some other wonky stuff as it gets more heavily infested. But at some point in that gallery, you're going to find that tight S-shaped curve. Next is the emerald ash borer larva itself. And so what's distinct about this is if you pull one of these grubs out of an ash tree, the way to identify it is it has those 2 spine-like projections at the tail end of the larva. They're called the Urogompi, but they're these 2 little black pincers or spine-like projections. If you have 2 of those on a larva pulled out of an ash tree, you know it's emerald ash borer. We have other insects that have 1 of those or none of them, but if it has those 2 spine-like projections at the tail end, that is an emerald ash borer larva if it was pulled out of an ash tree. And then next up is the adult beetle itself. It is very distinct looking and has that kind of bright, showy, iridescent green wing covers, that kind of deep magenta colored abdomen, and it's about a 1/2 inch long by about 1/8 inch wide. So if you do happen to come across the beetle itself, that is one way to identify it. we'll say it's not as common in earlier on in the infestation. You may see it more often if you're in a very heavily infested area, but oftentimes these insects are up in the canopy of the tree. But occasionally you might see it on the sitting on the trunk of a tree in a nice sunny day or something like that. But it's not as common that you come across the adult beetle itself. And lastly, they do make a distinct D-shaped exit hole when they exit the tree. As you can see in that picture in the bottom right, they have that flat side and it makes that D-shaped. This is distinct, but it's also probably the worst thing to look for if you're trying to find emerald ash borer early. Uh, like I said, the beetles are about 1/8 of an inch wide. So if you're looking at a large mature ash tree with thick bark, finding an 1/8 inch hole on that bark is going to be very difficult. And if you can see those D-shaped exit holes at eye level, if you were to look up into the canopy of the tree, you would see a whole lot more damage and signs and symptoms that that tree's infested. And you probably could have caught it a year or two earlier. So and also we have other insects that leave, oval shaped exit holes that can look kind of D-shaped. If you do find a D-shaped exit hole and you don't see any other damage, if you have permission, you're better off removing some of that bark to look for that S-shaped feeding gallery underneath, or other signs that would tell you that that tree is infested. And here are just like the common insects that are confused with emerald ash borer. So we get reports each year that are misidentifying insects. You can see emerald ash borer up in the left-hand corner. But the most common thing we get reported to us in May and June and first part of July is that six-spotted tiger beetle. It has that same bright iridescent green color, but it's a ground nesting beetle. And so a lot of times people see that run across their deck or their sidewalk or driveway and think they found emerald ash borer. So that really is the most common one that's identified. All right. So what you want to look for if you're trying to find emerald ash borer earlier on, before you see those D-shaped exit holes at eye level. The signs and symptoms that we look for the most is woodpecker damage. So this has really been the number one way for us to identify new areas. And what we're looking for is that bark blonding or flaking. And then that kind of tells you where to look. And then you're looking for these small dime-sized, light-colored, oval-shaped woodpeck holes within those blonded or flaked out areas. And a lot of times you're going to see this initially on those branches between 2 to 6 inches in diameter. And usually they're going to show up on that southwest facing side of the tree first, that side of the tree that gets the most amount of sunlight. So that's where you want to be looking if you're trying to identify it in a tree early. And right now is the perfect time of year to look for this damage before the trees leaf out. You can really see clearly up in the canopy, and you've had all winter for more of this damage to accrue. If you have a nice pair of binoculars, that can be really helpful. A lot of times woodpeckers, when they're going after the larvae underneath the bark, they will knock off enough of that outer bark, and you will be able to see part of that S-shaped tunneling pattern in a woodpecked area if you have a nice pair of binoculars. Some more examples of that. You have this green ash on the left. You have these blonde patches, and within those blonde patched areas, you have those shallow woodpeck holes. The tree in the middle is a black ash tree. It's not the same colored bark, but you can still see some of that kind of blonding and those woodpeck holes. It doesn't stick out as much, but it does do somewhat similar things. And then in that picture on the right is a heavily infested green ash tree in a park where you can, once a tree is really heavily infested, you will see woodpecker damage all the way down to the root flare. And the bark starts to fall off, as you can see in that bottom part of it, that you can see emerald ash borer galleries all throughout that area where the bark has been stripped off. Other things you might see are things like bark splits. So when that tree is initially infested, that tree's host defenses, it like tries to cordon off that wound where that insect larva has been tunneling, and it begins to grow callus tissue around where that gallery is. And as it continues to grow, that bark separates from the surface of the wood, and it creates a nice split. And oftentimes you can see that S-shaped tunneling pattern on the surface of the wood within those bark splits. And so here are some more examples of that. You can see all along that main stem of the tree on the left, you have these long vertical cracks in the bark, where it would be easy to pull off some of that bark if you were to walk up to it, or you could see that S-shaped tunneling pattern on the surface of the wood in between that split. And a little bit more difficult to see, you have this picture on the right. If you look up at the very top of that picture in the center, you can actually see part of a bark split with a gallery on the surface of the wood in the middle of it. So they're a little less easy to spot than when you see that blonding and then look for that woodpecker damage, but there are also signs that you will see on trees. And lastly, canopy thinning and epicormic sprouting. These are general decline, and when emerald ash borer, a lot of times the canopy thinning will lag behind when you can actually see that woodpecker damage. So that's why we say to look for that first. But you're going to see it kind of die, that canopy die from the top down, and you have an overall thinning of the canopy. So fewer leaves, smaller leaves, a lot more light penetrating through the canopy. And then you'll get a lot of kind of those sucker sprouts along the main stem and lower part of the canopy. It gives the tree a real bushy appearance. They're trying to put out that new growth. And so that's a very common sight to see, is that picture on the right. And as far as symptom progression go, this is on average what we've seen in general. Early on, if it's emerald ash borer is just getting established in a new area, it could take maybe 7 years to initially kill a tree. Well, that population is just starting to build. And then in areas that are really heavily infested, say parts of the metro or the southern part of the state, you may see trees killed in as little as 3 or 4 years where that pest pressure is extremely high. But on average, it's about 5 years from initial infestation point to tree death. And so in that first year of infestation, you have small larvae present. You're not really going to see any outward signs that tree is infested. If you want to find emerald ash borer in a tree in that first year of infestation, you'd have to do something like what we call as branch sampling, and that's removing 2 meter sections of branches in the mid to upper canopy and then debarking it with a draw knife to look for the larvae. In that second year of infestation, you have more emerald ash borer building up in that tree. You may have some woodpecker damage possible at this point. Depends if they've found that food source yet. It's really in that third year where this damage is much more likely to be visible. Depending on how healthy the tree was before it started being impacted by emerald ash borer, you may or may not have much canopy decline at this point. But you will likely be able to see woodpecker damage and potentially see bark splits. If you know what to look for, this is when you can really identify it in a tree, and it'll be kind of at that point where it might still be treatable with insecticide or not. For most homeowners, they typically find it in that kind of fourth year of infestation where you really start to see the visible canopy impacts. You really see it thinning out. You may see woodpecker damage now down onto the trunk of the tree. And then within a year or two after that, that tree is completely dead. And so that is the general progression of emerald ash borer symptoms in a tree. All right, so distribution, where we know it is in Minnesota. Like I mentioned, we now have 54 counties in the state with confirmed emerald ash borer infestations. So what's displayed here is the emerald ash borer status map. This is updated nightly, so when we have new confirmations in new areas, it gets entered into this map. So if you're ever wondering where emerald ash borer is known to be in the state, please reference this map. If you know about different locations that aren't within these generally infested areas that aren't on the map, please report it to us. We really depend on knowledgeable people to let us know where they're seeing signs and symptoms. And so what's the important things about this map is it shows where the emerald ash borer quarantine boundaries are. So what are quarantine counties and what are not. And then it also shows what we call the generally infested area. And so that's this green polygon that has a buffer around confirmed emerald ash borer infested trees. And so this is to better show where emerald ash borer is impacting trees. Like I mentioned, the cryptic nature of the insect, emerald ash borer is always further beyond what you can visually see in the environment, where it takes, at least 1 or 2 years to begin seeing symptoms. In an ash tree, the average spread rate of the insect by itself is at least 1 to 2 miles a year. So it's always further beyond, and this is to better show you where it's impacting trees. So if you're within a generally infested area, you basically consider it that your trees are beginning to be impacted by emerald ash borer, whether you're seeing signs of damage or not, and you want to be making decisions now on how you're going to deal with that. And then if you're within 10 to 15 miles of a generally infested area, that's when you want to consider maybe beginning treatment if you have high value ash trees that you don't want to lose. All right. So to start with the new infestations that were found this winter, We'll start from south and go north. There was a detection in Aitkin County. So this was in Malmo Township. County forester found it at a timber sales site, and it's just a few miles off of Lake Mille. They also then a week or two later found it 5 or so miles to the south, not too far from that Mille County border or from the original spot that was found. So the original site where it was found, it had anywhere from 25 to 50 trees that were showing signs of infestation. I'm not quite sure at how many at the other site, but and generally speaking, there's probably more going on in these areas and even outside what is shown as generally infested at this point. So if you're in those areas, please be on the lookout and start planning for how you're going to deal and manage your ash trees on your property. Next up is the find in northern Pine County. So this was reported by a resident about 3 miles east of Willow River. And so there is 2 locations found about a mile apart, and there's a number of trees showing signs of infestation in that area. So once again, there is likely more going on. There's other infestations further to the south in that county. All of Wisconsin's counties have emerald ash borer infestations at this point. So we'll start to see stuff over by the St. Croix River and move west as well. So likely there's more going on outside of what is deemed the generally infested area as well. And lastly, we had a report of trees found in Virginia, Minnesota. So there was 8 trees identified as infested, and they were found basically on the eastern side entrance to the Mesabi Community College right there off of North 9th Avenue. No other trees in town have been identified, but like I said, it's likely impacting other trees throughout the community, and that generally infested area encompasses all of the city of Virginia and parts of Mountain Iron. So if you're within those communities, you want to start thinking about how you're going to deal with the ash trees. All right. Another useful thing about this map, you can measure how close you are to infestation. You can search it like that, and all this data is available for download if you're interested in that. So we have it posted in the Minnesota Geospatial Commons. You can download all this information as well. All right, so next up is regulations. So there are a few regulations associated with this insect, and that involves the movement of any ash material or hardwood firewood. The reason for the quarantines, the purpose of them is to reduce or eliminate the spread of the pest through human-assisted movement. So we know the insect itself, moves on average, 1 to 2 miles a year on its own. The insect's flight capability, it can fly a few miles, but oftentimes they reinfest the same tree or a tree right next to it. They don't go usually more than 100 meters. It's just a small proportion of that insect that will strike out longer distance and kind of create these satellite infestations that eventually coalesce into one large one. But we do know movement of firewood has been a major driver in long distance dispersal of this insect. So having quarantine regulations trying to slow that movement of potentially infested material to new locations is important. And we're restricting that pest movement while trying to facilitate trade for any company that deals with these materials. We have both an internal quarantine and an external quarantine. So the internal quarantine, it regulates the intrastate movement of regulated articles. So that's from county to county, as you can see on that REAB status map. And then we also have an external quarantine, which limits the movement of those regulated articles into the state from out-of-state sources like Canada or North Dakota, South Dakota, things like that. So those are the 2 different types of quarantines that we have in place currently. What are regulated? So we have any ash material, any emerald ash borer life stage, ash mulch, and then all hardwood firewood. So that's any hardwood species cut into 4-foot lengths or less, split or not, is considered firewood. And we include all hardwood firewood because the average person cannot typically tell what species of wood is in a cut pile of firewood. So if you have other hardwoods that you would like to move that you can keep in greater than 4-foot lengths, the quarantine rules will not apply to you. But once it's below that 4-foot length, it is considered firewood and it is regulated. And so you can see on this map the new quarantine locations that kind of have that green shade with the red outline. So now all of Mille Lacs County is considered quarantined. All of Aitkin County, the rest of Pine County, and another section of St. Louis County are added to the quarantine. That limits the movement of that material to unquarantined areas. You can move freely within the unquarantined areas, and you can bring that material into quarantine areas, but once it's brought into the quarantine area, it is now regulated. And so this is just kind of showing what those regulated articles, they're ash logs, split firewood, wood chips and mulch, and that hardwood firewood. And so this kind of illustrates what you can and cannot do with this quarantine. So for the intrastate movement of these regulated articles, you cannot move these regulated articles from a quarantine area to a non-quarantined area. So you see those red arrows on there, that means stop. The only way to move those regulated articles from a quarantine area to a non-quarantine area is through a compliance agreement with the state of Minnesota. And this basically outlines a method of how you're going to deal with that product and ensure that you're not actually spreading to a new area. And I'll outline some of those options here in the next slide. The yellow means caution. You can transit a quarantine. So if you're originating in a non-quarantine area and your destination is a non-quarantine area, you can transit through the quarantine. You just can't do overnights. You can stop for lunch or get gas, things like that. But that's how those rules apply. And then you can move freely outside of the quarantine. You can move freely within the quarantine. So within contiguous counties that are all quarantined, you can move freely within that area. And then, like I mentioned, you can bring regulated articles from non-quarantine areas into the quarantine, but once it's brought there, is then considered regulated. All right. And so treatment options, if you need a compliance agreement to move regulated articles, some of the options are you can chip or grind. This really takes a tub grinder. You need to get down to 1 inch by 1 inch in less than 2 inches. You can debark it. So that's complete bark removal and remove a 1/2 inch of sapwood. You can compost. It has to reach those temperature specifications for that duration of time. Heat treatment, I think we have 12 or 13 companies that are heat treatment certified for firewood sales. They're heat treated to the point where they're reaching 140 degrees Fahrenheit for 60 minutes. That's verified with temperature probes annually. And then there's kiln drying for mostly lumber specific reasons, and there's also fumigation options. So those are the main treatment options if you need a compliance agreement with the state of Minnesota. And once again, that definition of firewood, because it's the most common thing that to be dealt with, is wood cut to lengths of 4 feet or less, split or not, whether it's commercial or private use in all hardwood species. And once again, firewood cannot enter from Canada or other states. It cannot leave the emerald ash borer quarantine or the spongy moth quarantine in Lake and Cook counties as well. Firewood can move around freely inside of the pest quarantine. It can move around freely outside of the quarantine, and it can move freely throughout the entire state if it is certified firewood that has that MDA logo, which means it was likely heat treated and it's certified to be pest free. All right. So if you have any quarantine questions or comments on the new emergency quarantine that was put into place and those boundaries, here's the contact information where you can contact Kimberly Thielen Kramers. You can give her an email there. Also, any comments made during this presentation will be considered comments for the quarantine purposes as well. So just as a reminder, just to kind of show you how well EAB can hide, you can have emerald ash borer emerging from cut firewood well over a year after that wood was initially cut. So it really is a vector for spreading pests. And in general, it's a good idea just to buy firewood where you're going to burn it. It's not a good idea to transport firewood long distances because besides emerald ash borer, there's other pests and pathogens that could potentially be spread in cut firewood. So it's really just a habit to get into to buy firewood where you're going to burn it. And so here's a piece of ash wood with no outward signs. You peel off the bark. There's the emerald ash borer gallery. You still don't see an insect. Well, you dig in right there and you see it hiding out. It's in that J larva stage, so it's just waiting for things to warm up so it can pupate and emerge from that wood and fly off to a new tree. So really, that's why we have these major campaigns for not moving firewood, because it is a pathway that's really kind of speeding up the spread of this insect throughout the country. All right, next up is management. So, like I mentioned, we're just going to briefly touch on the options for dealing with individual trees or in a community. Um, if you have more forest-related management questions, I'll point you to resources later on. So we do have best management practices. So that's based on when that emerald ash borer flight season is and when that dormant period is, when they're not actively flying around. So if you can, try to avoid doing any sort of pruning or ash tree removals during that active period. This is for a couple of reasons. Uh, Emerald ash borer will often reinfest the same tree or a tree right next to it. Um, by waiting to the dormant period to remove the tree, you let that emerald ash borer lay its eggs on a tree that's already infested, and you can take it out in that dormant period and dispose of the wood at that point. Also, if you're removing trees in an active period and you have to move that wood waste to a new location to be processed, you could potentially be having insects emerge from that waste as you drive down the highway to a new location. So if you can avoid it, that's ideal. Obviously, that's not an option for a lot of businesses or people to do that. So if you do have to do pruning or removals during the active period, if you can chip that wood before you move it to a new location or leave it on site, that's even better. Or at the very least, cover the load as you move it to wherever it's going to be processed. All right. So when it comes to management, there really is two options: removals and treatments. You can wait and do nothing, but eventually you're going to have to do something. Uh, so the best way to think about it is you can do removals before emerald ash borers arrives. You can identify poor quality trees, poorly sited trees for removal, and then maybe start getting something else planted, knowing that eventually emerald ash borer is going to take out the remaining ash trees within that area. You can identify trees with showing woodpecker damage, so signs of infestation to remove as you're actively managing stuff when emerald ash borer is found, and dealing with dead trees, which become hazardous quite quickly. Ash trees dry out very quickly and begin to fail in unpredictable ways. So if you have ash trees located next to your house, your garage, in your backyard, and in locations that are maybe a little bit harder to get to or deal with, you don't want to wait until that tree is fully dead. It will fail in unpredictable ways. They do not stay standing that long on the landscape after they die. It is not like an elm tree that you'll see standing, a decade plus later. Ash trees will die and fall apart. So that can really increase the cost of removal depending on where that tree may happen to be in your yard. Obviously, if you're in a more natural area, you can leave trees to die and fall apart. And then there's also insecticide treatments. And so those can be done preventively or therapeutically. So you can treat trees before emerald ash borer is known to be in your area. Um, Treatments are not a one and done thing. They have to be reapplied annually or biannually, depending on the insecticide used. And you can also treat trees after they're lightly infested. So as long as that tree still has a healthy enough canopy, it can still be treated after it is initially infested. So it can prevent it, and you can also keep a tree from being killed by EAB if you catch it before it has damaged the tree too much. Some things you want to think about when you're deciding on removal or treatment and what is the best option for you is how close is emerald ash borer to you? Are you within the generally infested area? Should you be acting now to figure out what you want to do with your trees? Are you within 10 to 15 miles of a known infested area? Or are you still further away than that? Do you still have more time? How healthy is the tree in the first place? Tree or trees? Is it worth treating? Does it have high value? Does it give you a lot of shade? How large is that tree? Is it a smaller tree? Is it something that's easier to remove and get something new planted and growing and back to that size more quickly? Or is it a really large mature tree that gives you lots of shade and lots of value on your property and might be worth investing in treatments to keep it around? And then how many trees do you have to deal with? Do you have a large number of trees to deal with? What ones are the best condition? maybe treating a few of those every other ones those treatments may help protect it for a little while, although those untreated trees will eventually be killed by emerald ash borer. There's a number of ways that you can kind of work with this to figure out what might be best for your situation. And treatment is a good strategy for communities that have to manage a large number of trees. Just knowing that emerald ash borer populations eventually build and kind of explode and cause that tree mortality in a short amount of time. Treating a number of trees, maybe not for the life of the tree, but to kind of be able to control that rate at which you have to do tree removals can also be helpful as well. And if you want to maintain the look of a downtown area, a park, or your yard, those are all reasons to treat as well. All right, so there are the insecticide options available for emerald ash borer. There's a few different kinds of insecticides that you can use that are systemic. They affect the adult beetles that are feeding the leaves of the tree, and they also affect the larvae that are underneath the bark, tunneling in that cambium layer. And so the kind of couple of main ones that are used, the ones that tree care professionals most often use for mature trees is the active chemical emamectin benzoate. And this is a restricted use pesticide that you need to be a licensed pesticide applicator to apply. And that is applied via a trunk injection directly into the tree, and that is guaranteed for 2 years. And it has showed some effectiveness in that third year as well. So if you're a homeowner managing an individual tree, trying to keep it protected, you want to stick to that 2-year treatment cycle. If you're a city trying to manage a large number of trees, you may think about doing a 3-year treatment cycle to try to spread out those resources and be able to protect more trees within your community. So it just kind of depends on the situation there. And then there's also soil drenches and things like that are typically you have the active ingredient being a neonicotinoid, so those are not good for pollinators, but if applied safely and properly, they can not impact those. Those are usually applied via soil drench and are effective for a year before they need to be reapplied again. So if you're going to your local garden store, that soil drench, that is typically what is available to the average homeowner, where you don't need to be a licensed pesticide applicator to apply it. The important thing with that, though, is you really need to make sure you have an appropriate chemical for the size tree that you are treating. Sometimes the products available to the average homeowner are not rated for trees, 15 inches in diameter or larger. So you really need to make sure you read that label and make sure it's appropriate for the size tree that you have. And we really recommend that if you're going to invest in treatment and you have a tree that's bigger than 12 or 15 inches in diameter, that you look into getting it professionally treated, and that's would involve contacting a local tree care professional that's licensed to do the treatments to apply that treatment. In general, what we've seen throughout the state is that prices for treatment range. On average, we've seen around $10 to $12 a diameter inch for that treatment. So if it's a 15-inch tree, that's going to be around $150 every couple of years to protect that tree, which is not cheap. But depending on the situation, removals can be very expensive as well if it's located in a certain place in your yard. So they are, like I said, very effective. You just, as long as they're applied properly on a healthy enough tree. And so kind of a general rule of thumb is that a tree is treatable up to 30% canopy decline. So this is just an image that kind of shows you that scale. So the tree on the left is in good condition, less than 10% canopy decline, great candidate for treatment. The tree in the middle is still healthy enough to be treated. If the tree's infested and it has 25% canopy decline, it's still a treatable tree. You're going to stop the damage where it's at. It may not come back fully from the damage that's already been done. And then a tree that has more than 30% canopy decline, as you can see on the right there, is not a good candidate for treatment, is not healthy enough to fully uptake and spread the chemicals out to keep it from declining further. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb there for treatments. And just lastly, the management priorities, understand that they are going to change as you move from an uninfested area into a heavily infested area. if you're in a not known to be infested area, detecting and reporting infestations and planning for the arrival of emerald ash borer is the most important steps you could be taking, especially inventory. It's hard to make a management plan if you don't have an inventory of the ash resource that you have on your property. So that is the best thing to do if you're not known to be infested yet. And then as you emerald ash borer is found, focusing on treating any high value trees that you don't want to lose and keeping up with sanitation. So removing the known infested trees and dealing with that material in a timely fashion. And then as that emerald ash borer population explodes and you start seeing mass tree mortality in the area, you really want to just try to minimize wood movement out of the area and utilize it and dispose of it safely in whatever way you can. All right. So like I mentioned, if you are looking for more forest land management expertise, please reach out to the DNR Forest Stewardship Program. They do advise private forest landowners on forest management, given your particular type of woods that you may have and the amount of ash you may have on your property. They do have cost share for forest management issues and projects. So you can see the URL right there, and I think Chris is putting it in the chat as well. And then if you are a community county, like managing a large number of public property trees, things like that, DNR Community and Urban Forestry do have grant opportunities every so often. So please visit their website and look for opportunities to get funding to help with devising management plans or removing and replanting in your community. And then lastly, there is a forester contact map for the DNR to find your area forester, the appropriate person to contact for your area. All right. So lastly is reporting. So we really depend on knowledgeable people throughout the state. We have a large state and we can't cover all that ground. Please, if you think you have found emerald ash borer in a new location, please let somebody know. Take pictures, detailed notes, make sure you have the exact location so it's easier for follow-up. If you happen to find the insect or larva or something, please take that sample, put it in a plastic bag, throw it in the freezer, and please report it. So you can either contact a local city forester, you can report any invasive species through EDMAPS. So that's a early detection mapping system for all invasive species. And if you submit a report via that, it ends up with the correct state identifier. And then lastly, but probably the easiest way to report emerald ash borer is through the Department of Ag's Report a Pest. So you can use the online reporting form, you can send us an email, or you can give us a call and leave a detailed message. Like I mentioned, it is really helpful to have pictures and make sure you have the exact location. Don't just take pictures of zoomed out of a crappy looking tree from a distance. We really want to see like that woodpecker damage, any insect tunneling, any exit holes, anything like that that you might find that is making you think that that tree is infested. So like I said, please report if you see anything around the state that you think might be infested. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us so we can now cover questions. So first question is about treatment. If eventually you'd be able to stop treatment after emerald ash borer populations kind of move through and kill the majority of the mature ash that haven't been treated. So unfortunately, no, emerald ash borer is going to persist in the environment, and once you stop treating, those populations will be able to build up and eventually kill that tree. Down the line, as scientific advancements are made in these types of treatment options, there may be longer treatment windows, but treatment will still be required if you want to keep your tree protected. So question before that was, are there any funds available to help cities and communities to treat and remove infected ash trees? There has been some financial assistance from DNR Urban and Community Forestry where they've had grant funding for communities to do that, to help with replanting and removal. And depending on the grant cycle, sometimes treatments have been allowed too. I believe there might be another round of grant funding available at some point this year. It'll be posted on that DNR Community Forestry website. And if you don't know about it already, I would really suggest signing up for the Minnesota Shade Tree Advisory Committee has a newsletter that comes out weekly, and they list any funding resources or opportunities in that weekly email that comes out on Mondays. So I highly encourage you to sign up for that as well. Going down the list here. Explain the reasoning behind leaving Carlton and Southwest St. Louis County outside of the quarantine, especially in all directions of that area. That is a good question. So the folks that decided on those boundaries tried to keep it as tight to where Emerald Ash Borer is known to be. I will say this: if to change those boundaries, I encourage people to report any potentially infested trees in those areas, because as soon as we get reports, those boundaries will change. Last question is, what are your thoughts on planting ash native to EAB? Is native range. Manchurian ash is the example. Um, they've done a little bit of the Forest Service has done a little bit of experimenting with that in some stands up north. I will say there has been some Manchurian ash planted in like the city of Minneapolis and other areas in the metro, and they have been killed by emerald ash borer. So I don't necessarily think it's a very good option at this point. And I'm not. I'll have to double check if it's actually banned to sell ash in nurseries right now, but I know pretty much all nurseries have stopped doing that because you are basically selling a tree that is going to be killed by emerald ash borer. Uh, Chris, I'm not sure if you gave the financial assistance map. There are a small number of communities that have financial assistance for private landowners based on financial need. So it's a locally set criteria. Hennepin County has financial assistance along with cities like Burnsville and a few others throughout the metro and a couple in greater Minnesota. It's a very small list. So I do know it's usually you have to be at 80% or below of the median average household income to qualify in a lot of these communities to get financial assistance for tree removal. And a lot of times in communities, there are options to where you can work with the city if they're requiring the removal to apply that to your property taxes over a number of years to help offset that initial large expense. Okay. Um, how do you think Emerald Ash Borer made it to Virginia? That's a good question. It's hard to know for sure. It could have been moved on infested firewood. It could have been as something as stupid as a car parked in Duluth drove up to Virginia and it had an emerald ash borer beetle on its windshield, and it flew off when it stopped in Virginia. Like it's really hard to know for sure how exactly it got there. Like likely human assisted movement. Great. Thank you for the comment. That'll be submitted as well. So reiterate the rules for transporting ash logs from a quarantine area through a non-quarantine area. So the rules, you can transit a quarantine if the origin point is from a non-quarantined area and your destination point is a non-quarantined area. Um, and that the rules for that is that you can't do overnights, but you can make stops for fuel and food and things like that. You just can't do an overnight with that material. And you can move regulated material from a non-quarantine area into a quarantine area. It's just once it's in that quarantine area, it's regulated and you can't move it back out. Oh, good replacement trees. So it kind of depends on where you're located and what you're looking for. You know, the U of M extension has a good list along with the DNR as well. I'll look for that here in a second. Um, it's things like swamp white oak. Just trying to make sure that you're diversifying what you're replacing with. You don't want to just plant all of one species again. So that is what has, um, in at least in more urban areas, has left us very vulnerable, and having this have such a huge impact. We have kind of monocultures where we have entire streets lined with one species of trees. So being as diverse as possible in your replanting is really key, and will set you up for being less vulnerable to future pests and pathogens that may come through here. One second here. I'll get you a link for U of M extension. We do have outreach available. Uh, so we have things like matchbooks and whatnot that we can be distributed to campgrounds. We also have a door hanger that's available. Um, I will pull up that information for you. So if you go to there's a tab there that has outreach material available upon request. So look at that material and we can send any of those things to you. Or some are available in PDF if you want to print yourself as well. How important is it to report newly infested trees once a discovery is made? So that depends on where it is. So we really want reports of trees that are outside of that generally infested area. Stuff that would help show the distribution is greater. So, if it's on the same block that a tree has already been identified, that's not really necessary. All right. Is there any other questions? Well, once again, if you think of something after this that you have a question about, please feel free to reach out to me. There's my contact information still there. Once again, this was recorded and it will be made available on MDA's YouTube channel. So if you know of anybody else that would benefit from this, please share it with them. And thank you again for attending.